Check, test. Is this thing on? I think it's on. Welcome to the Stones of Strength podcast, an audio plinth from upon which we will endeavor to centralize and showcase stories and information related to the lifting of historical and non-historical stones and the ongoing development and re-emergence of stone lifting culture.
We are your hosts.
There we go. Now what? Snappy intro done.
Okay, so we're into it here. So we're your hosts. I'm Dave.
I'm Dale.
And we're two brothers from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
As this is the introductory podcast, we thought we'd take the opportunity to really just introduce ourselves to everybody, give you an understanding of where we're from, our backgrounds athletically, our relationship with stone lifting, provide an understanding of why it is we're doing a podcast and what our plans are for the future of the show. And I think because my story and my experience with stone lifting picks up well after David, you were already a fairly well-entrenched member of the stone lifting community. I'll let you kick it off and give everyone an understanding of how you got involved in this amazing but fairly obscure activity.
Yeah, I just been involved and interested in strength for as long as I can remember, man. Like you a little bit later than me, but we were kids of the 80s. Our dad was a cop. He was badass. He was a member of the SWAT team. And so we grew up and we were fortunate to have a gym in our basement. So the concept of strength was always interesting. And in junior high, I got involved in wrestling, which I was never as good as you, but I really enjoyed it. And we grew up with playing sports a whole life. We were fortunate to have a lot of opportunities to do that. Strength is obviously a big component of sport, as anyone who's an athlete of any kind will know that. My interest truly into the world of strength wasn't until I'm a firefighter as my profession, and so I worked really hard to get strong for this job because it's kind of relevant. And in that process, I became interested in powerlifting. That was my introduction to the actual strength world, and so I trained for quite a while and then got into competitions. I mean, nothing special, but did all right at local levels. Then a fellow from work had said, you should really try strongman. Powerlifting's amazing and it's a great base, but there's so much. Strongman has a lot more implements. It varies a lot. There's not
much
just
more of a dynamic activity, right?
Yeah, and it's not just 3 events, right? There's almost infinite combinations, right? Mm-hmm. And so that piqued my interest, and then I got involved in that. And I really enjoyed it, and again did quite well at a local level, but I did love it. And then COVID hit and took a shit on the world, as everybody knows, and that kind of pushed people to a different spot. And I was fortunate to be prepping for a while and built a good garage gym, and I got involved in an even more obscure thing called steel bending, and that was something I took on to try and develop my grip strength for strongman, and it worked really well. And then when the world opened back up,
let's just pause right there, because it didn't just work well. You hold a world record for the fastest horseshoe break.
Yeah, well,
you're modest. I won't let you be so modest, because that's an incredible accomplishment. So.
Yeah, it was fun, right? Like we're making a podcast about stone lifting. I'm the kind of person, if I'm going to do it, I dive all in, and I did that for steel bending. And so to backtrack actually a little bit before the steel bending is, I believe it was 2019, I saw Stoneland, and that was my first introduction to the stone lifting world. Having been interested in strongman before that, I knew there was that concept, but I didn't know much about it. And so I wasn't as drawn immediately to the actual natural stone lifting as much as I was the Dinnie rings. I thought that was really, really neat, and got a buddy of mine to make me some Dinnie pins and worked on that for a little bit. But then, COVID hit, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to travel to Scotland, so that got put on the back burner. Now, fast forward to COVID starting to let up a little bit. And that's when I got my interest peaked for natural stone lifting. There's a fellow by the name of Troy. I'll probably reference Instagram a fair bit on this podcast, because that's how a lot of the community communicates. And so a guy by the name Troy Beard and Boulder is his handle, who's quite a good friend now.
And an absolute monster.
Yes, he certainly is. But Troy was the one that kind of first brought the stone lifting culture to Edmonton. He got some stones in his warehouse, and he would always be open to letting people start lifting them. And that's when I first went and gave it a try and had a bit of a knack for it and really, really got interested in it. I caught the bug there. Now, later that summer, Troy hosted a competition called Alberta's Strongest Viking, which I've competed in 3 times now. We just finished this past weekend, third one.
Where you regained your title in emphatic fashion. It was
it went
fantastic.
It went well, and really got interested in stone lifting that way.
Yeah.
And loved it, and really, really got hooked. And then that was the end of summer that year, and then all winter just thought about it and got a couple stones lifting in my garage and going to Troy's and training, and really wanted to do the first stone lifting trip. And that's when my sights were set on Scotland, and I thought, okay, it's the time. Let's do this. And so I started training for that all winter, and taking it a lot more serious. Now, in that process, I started working with a fellow by the name of Ryan Stewart, and we're hoping that he's one of our first guests here. And he is one of the goats of stone lifting, and he was a part of a documentary called Utah Stones of Strength. And that was my direct influence for the idea of doing a project that we've had going on now called the Edmonton Stones of Strength. We do not have the history of Scotland, Iceland, or many of these other countries, but that doesn't mean we can't start something, and that doesn't mean we can't build some culture and start bringing it to the forefront here, because it's an amazing thing, as everybody knows who's listening to this, because why else would you be listening to this if you didn't
stumbled on this.
Yeah.
Go find some stones, lift them up, you'll understand.
Yeah, and so, it's kind of just gone from there. And we'll talk about our trip to Scotland later, but, that's a long story, somewhat short here. So, I'll pass it to you, Dale.
Yeah, I mean, similar to you, grew up in the same household. Athletics and strength and just physical fitness was always something that was very important to us. There's the physical aspects of it, but there's also the social aspects. There's something to be said about having to work towards a common goal with a group of people. If you were a subpar hockey athlete like myself, it was typically a different group of people every year. So you had to learn how to work with different personalities, right? Sacrificing maybe your own personal expectations or goals for the betterment of a collective of people is a skill that you can carry forward into your life. So athletics was always something that our parents didn't push us into, but always encouraged, whether it was wanting to do soccer, hockey, rugby, football, a very, very quick stint in Taekwondo, where the fact that I can't stand still for very long came to light, and it turned out to not be a good fit for me, at which point I was exposed to wrestling. So that was sort of one of the big focuses of my athletic history. When David was in grade 7, he got involved in the wrestling team at his junior high, which then sort of opened the gateway to getting involved in wrestling at a local team called the Edmonton Wrestling Club. I was in grade 5 at the time and needed a bit of a physical outlet. So I joined David to go to the Edmonton Wrestling Club and started wrestling from there. And like I said, subpar hockey player. So really, as I got older and continued to wrestle more and more, I found more success. And that's where I spent a lot more of my focus in developing, my skills as a wrestler versus other sports. I still, the skills from wrestling translated really well to football, even more so to rugby. So in high school, I really enjoyed rugby as well. And, was fortunate enough to play on Team Alberta with that. Wrestling, I wrestled for about 8 years and had
very well.
Had some success, at the city level, provincial level. I wrestled at a national level, and in high school, I was fortunate enough to represent Team Canada at the Pan American Games for the cadet age category. Now, that has no affiliation with the military. That's just the name that they give to the high school age people wrestling. Went down to South America and got absolutely dominated by a bunch of South American mutants, but I did all right. And then you sort of hit this decision point going to university, where I had to decide whether or not I was going to carry forward and wrestle, as well as try to sort of focus on my academic pursuits, which, unironically, someone who loves stones is in geology. But but I knew that I wasn't the kind of person who's going to be able to balance the academics, the social aspect of university, and the athletics. Some people can do it effectively. I knew I wasn't going to. I'm not one of those people. I sort of similar to David when he says, if you get excited about something or focus on something, you kind of go all in. And so I wanted to focus on my studies. I knew that that was going to set me up for success professionally in the future. Unfortunately, wrestling doesn't really have much of a professional end point unless you want to transition to mixed martial arts or anything like that. And I'm far too much of a wimp to take that avenue.
That was before MMA was big, though, to be fair. That was fair. Early 2000s.
Yeah. So really from that point, and I guess to sort of backtrack a little bit, our parents are both very athletically inclined. They were fantastic athletes growing up, competing at national and international levels for various sports.
Still are.
Still are. So when we were young, a big portion of our summers were spent in the Okanagan as our parents were training for Ironman. And so in 1998, my father did his first Ironman triathlon. For those who don't know, it's a fairly grueling athletic endeavor, a 3.8 kilometer swim, 180 kilometer bike, followed by a full marathon, which is 42 kilometers. And after he did his first one, my mom decided that she was also going to join him as he trained for another one. And from that precipitated essentially a team that focused on not only training for Ironman, but also raising money for the Canadian Cancer Society. And so for really the latter, from when I was 10 until 18, we would watch our parents do this incredible event while raising money for the Canadian Cancer. So shout out mom and dad. And it was something that I always knew I wanted to do. Just the thought of sort of testing yourself in that kind of a physically grueling event was something that, for whatever reason, appealed to me. And so my 18th birthday present was the registration fee for Ironman. And so I did an Ironman when I was 18, 19, 20. My goal was to do 5 before I was 25. So I ended up doing 18, 19, 20, 22, 24. And that's when my focus sort of shifted to growing my career as a geologist. So.
Before we talk about that, you deserve some credit too, though, because when you were doing Ironman, you had a bit of a reputation for being the person that would do only a few practice rides and swims and runs and go and do an entire Ironman. And I remember you, very clearly saying, though, I think it's important to test your mettle at least once a year. But you decided to test your mettle by doing an Ironman. So that's got to be brought up here.
It was never a very aesthetically pleasing effort. I always ended up in the medical tent for about as many hours as I spent doing the race. But yeah, it was something that I felt, year after year when you're sitting and sort of your face is in the books and you're enjoying some of the social aspects of being a student. I want to take at least, one opportunity per year to see, if I could still push my body to the limits and how I would respond. So yeah, it worked out. Did those 5 Ironmans, and then after that, I really didn't have a lot of goals or a specific focus for my physical fitness or any training. I tried to stay active and spend time in the gym when I could. Also focused on starting a family and sort of growing my career. And then COVID came and changed the reality for me as it did for everybody else. And there was a lot of time spent, I was working at home. My family was at home. There was you're living day to day and your week sort of washed into one another. And I really felt the need that I had to find something to focus on. And sports and physical activities was always a really, really important outlet for me. And after a fairly stressful week where I was actually serving jury duty, I called David up and I said, "Hey, I need to come over and I need to move some heavy shit and burn off some steam." So I went over to your garage and we had a couple beers and a couple scotches and we lifted some stones. And
his first time doing his first stone session, he picked a 293 poorly handled stone to his chest. Just for reference, as his very first time.
With with significant difficulty, but it was something for me. Like I'd watched David in some of his local strongman competitions, and I was aware that he had, garnered this passion for natural stone lifting. And as soon as I picked up that stone, I instantly got it. all of a sudden I knew why it was that he found it so important and decided to dedicate so much of his training time and his focus to it. There's a primal component to it where you pick up a stone, and it is such a different thing to lifting a barbell or pushing machines around in the gym. It clicked, and I was interested. Like, this is something I want to do more of. And immediately my focus not only was on becoming a better stone lifter, but with David's encouragement was in tagging along with him on this trip to Scotland that we did.
No tag along, no.
Joining forces with you to visit the homeland and go lift some stones. So that was kind of where it was. Yeah, it was exciting for me. Like, the stone lifting was exciting. I wasn't sort of coming in at the ground level and having to work my way up to being able to lift a respectable stone. I had a bit of a knack from it based on my athletic background. So I was, it was like, cool. I can act. This is something I can actually do, and keep up with some of the big boys and not look hilariously outclassed. And so it was great. And I mean, at that point, you had already established the Edmonton Stones of Strength community. There was a number of people meeting up to do stone lifts on a weekly basis. And so that sort of camaraderie that had sort of been, from an athletic perspective, that had been missing from my life for a number of years was there. And it was fantastic. It was just
And that's a big part of this too. Like, that, I'm very, very pleased with how the Edmonton Stones of Strength is developed so far. It started with some weirdos in the River Valley digging up rocks and weighing them and lifting them, and then we, with the blessing of some of the gentlemen, Brett Nickel and Stevie Shanks, had very, very kindly allowed us to, I don't want to say use, but share the name Gathering for an event we held in late fall. We use that name out of respect, not to copycat the one in Scotland, the Donald Dinny Day Gathering, but just out of respect, because that's what we were doing. It wasn't a competition, but we had, I believe, about 20 athletes come together at our site, and we had 5 events, and we just pushed each other and had a couple beers, a couple scotches, a fire, and just supported each other and had a really good time. And so, anyone out there, I've talked to quite a few people online about this, and we definitely have a really good thing here, and I'm very pleased with it because we actually have a community. A lot of the community is connecting online, which is fantastic, but we have a lot here that we're developing, and I think that's really cool. And again, I got to give a lot of respect to our good friend Troy, who started, he kind of was the catalyst for all this. And this past weekend, so today is Friday, and just a few days ago on Sunday was his 3rd Strongest Viking competition, and actually Dale competed in his first. That was his first strength event, and he punched weight. He was either the lightest or second lightest, and
definitely had the skinniest legs. There's
photo evidence. Yeah, well, man, there's 18 guys there, and you were either the lightest or second lightest in this open weight category, and you beat guys that have been competing in strongmen for quite some time. And so, you kind of showed that you can do this, not just in Scotland when you lifted some massive stones there, but actually are able to compete. So it was awesome to see. It was,
and for some context, so that event that Troy put on this past year, as well as in the previous years, is not a typical strongman event. It's using natural, for the most part, unaltered implements, right? So there was, this past weekend, there was a log press, so just not a handled log, not a steel log, a log that was felled in the woods and cut to length. There was stone to shoulder. There was stone over bar, there was a stone throw, and there was a sort of a modified hookless Dinny pick event as well. And so it's really great to see that there are these people in our community that are catalysts for helping to nurture and develop stone lifting locally. But one thing that's also been really cool since I've become further involved in the stone lifting community and more so as a spectator. I mean, I have an Instagram. I don't post a lot, but I use that as a vessel through which I can observe all the cool things that are being done around the world. There are people across the United States, places like Scotland, Iceland don't really need these sort of catalysts because they have such a rich stone lifting history. But in places in Canada and the United States that don't already have that stone lifting history, there are groups popping up all over the place. You have these sort of these community members, guys like Ryan Stewart, that are developing local stones of strength that are not only sort of centerpieces for the community to gather around and lift, but also become destinations. So if you want to go on a trip to go and lift stones, you don't have to cross the ocean. If you live in North America, right? You can find those sort of things locally, which is really, really cool. You just find that if you're passionate about lifting stones and you don't have access to historical stones where you are, start your own test of strength. It's as easy as finding stones, weighing them, putting them out there, advertising them, lifting them, encouraging people to come out and test their hands. So
and that's exactly it. And it's actually been kind of neat. There's a gentleman from England who'd sent me a message. We'd been chatting on Instagram, and he said, "Man, I'm coming out to Canada actually," and he was going to be close to Edmonton, and he drove up to come lift some of our stones. Right, so we have people come from across the world that are coming to our area, and because of Instagram, it's pretty cool. And he goes, "Yeah, I'm coming to train with you guys," and he's actually coming up for a third time this week coming up, so we'll get a chance to train with him again. And it's really, really quite a cool thing. And I mean,
Zach McGuire,
just
a world-class strength athlete, came over to compete in Alberta Strongest Viking, as well as come and test himself against some of the Edmonton stones of strength that we've amassed, which is just so cool.
He's such a brute, man. Like, so at my garage, we have something that I have my own testing stone, and Zach showed up, and he's much younger than me, but he looks at it. I said, "You know what? I got a full gym here. Basically, just warm up with whatever you need." And the stone is 325 pounds, and Zach kind of looks at it and goes, "No, I'm ready, man." He just
born ready,
chalks up and just lifts 325 pounds to his chest. Just an unbelievable athlete. But I think that background kind of gives into why we actually want to do this podcast in the first place.
Yeah.
Me and Dale, we're not media guys. We're not those personalities, as I'm sure you can tell at this point. But we wanted to listen to a stone lifting podcast, and there isn't one. Now, of course, there are podcasts that have featured stone lifters, but there isn't one dedicated to it, to this small but very quickly growing community. And so that was kind of our idea with this, is that we love talking stones, we love everything about it. We were in Scotland together with our parents in this amazing stone lifting trip, and met guys like Jim Splain and Brett Nichols, and I'm sure we'll go into details on those stories, if not in this episode and other ones in the future, but we're fans of it as much as we are athletes in it, and we just want to use this as a platform to talk with these people we're interested in talking to, and if anything, it's not about us. We want to have a platform for all these people to talk about what they've been doing and what they've researched.
Yeah, in many ways, it's a bit of a selfish endeavor. As you'd indicated, there really isn't a dedicated stone lifting podcast, and there are just so many incredibly interesting people that are part of the stone lifting community on a global scale, and I want to hear their stories. And so we're hoping that this is an avenue through which we can engage with those individuals and not only hear their stories personally, but be able to allow other people to have access to that information. Because I think stone lifting sort of lives at this interesting crossroads between strength sports, history, and legend. And I think all of those things sort of intertwine to make it such a fascinating thing, right? Go ahead.
Oh, no, and I couldn't agree more. Like, it's so funny. The amount of times I've heard people say, so you go and lift rocks? Is like, well, yeah, I guess if you want to boil it down to the basics of it, but the amount of layers that are involved in this is what is so fascinating. And it goes, the more I learn, which I do not know much, but the more I'm learning, the more and more fascinated I am by it. Now, what is a rock? It's just a heavy object. Okay. Is it feel good to lift it? Yes, it does. Does it make you stronger? Yes, it does. Okay. Here, that's all it is. But then you go to Scotland, the stories and the culture and the myth behind it is amazing. In Ireland, and okay, there's some in Iceland, and then wait a minute, there's some in some of the Polynesian countries, and it's in China, and it's in Japan, and holy shit, this is all over the world.
Yeah.
It's
ubiquitous.
It's everywhere. It's the more and more information that's coming out. It's actually kind of, it sounds stupid to say, but it's a part of the human history and human condition, and this is something that we hope to dive into with the experts of these these countries and these lands and these specific stones, because there's so much to each of them that are just part of who we are as people. And I think that's really a big part of it. And was really happy to hear what you'd said earlier, Dale, about the first time you lifted a stone, like it just felt a click, because I've seen that click in other people's eyes. There's, a barbell is a barbell is a barbell. Okay. You can have slightly different plates, slightly different knurling, and that's great for barbell sports. And please trust me, I'm not shitting on barbell sports of any kind, but they are amazing and the athletes are incredible. But there's just, to me and to many people that are involved in this, they will know that there's something very special about lifting a stone. Like I've seen guys that lifted it for the first time and they just go, holy shit, this is awesome.
It's different. Yeah.
It's different, and every stone is different, and it's the stories are crazy. Like going to a place like where the Fiona stone is, and knowing, and I know, trust me, guys, I know that the history varies on it depending on who you talk to, whether you're going to the written sources or you're going to the cultural significance of the shape it was carved into. It varies, but to know that this is a place that Highland warriors went for hundreds and hundreds of years, and you go there and there's a feeling, and like I'm not a religious or a person that's into like too much spiritual stuff or anything at all like that, but when you go there and you put your hands on a stone that these men hundreds of years ago, the most badass people at that point in time went and lifted, there's something really unique and really cool about it.
I think part of the appeal is in that it's not just a strength test, it's a bit of a puzzle, right? Every stone is going to be different. The weight distribution is going to be different. The shape, the texture, the presence or absence of handle. So each stone presents a unique opportunity, a unique challenge. And even the way that you lift it, right? You're getting wind beneath the stone. You're getting the stone to your lap. You're getting it to your chest. You're getting it to your shoulder. So you have all of these different rungs in the ladder to sort of test yourself against and work yourself up to. And I think the way that it also differs a bit from a barbell is that when you empty the barbell and you remove the plates, you put it away, the physical representation of that challenge disappears. When you have a stone, that is a constant thing that's going to be around long after the human species, not to sound fatalist, but long after we're gone, that stone is still going to be there in existence, right? It's been there from before we existed. It'll be there long after we cease to exist. And so it's there. So you may try and test yourself against that stone and you walk away. When you come back, that stone remains unchanged. So you're seeing whether or not you have bettered yourself enough in comparison to a constant object to achieve your goals. And so that's what's great. And it's awesome. We're fortunate enough to live in an area where there's a fairly good collection of stones of varying size and weights. You can go down and you can really eye out those benchmarks and test yourself each time and come back to it and come back to it and come back to it. And it's akin to the way in which, the rock climbing is interesting to people, right? There's the strength test and there's the puzzle. And I think that's why, at least for myself, that's why stone lifting really appealed to me. And like you said, there's nothing against people that choose to lift heavy barbells. It just presented a bit of a different challenge and a different opportunity.
Like you touched on it, but I've always said stone's like a strength puzzle, right? I've mentioned Troy already. We both have a couple times, but it's funny because him and I would say, are at very similar levels of stone lifting, but we will most stones will lift quite opposite. Like there's one, he has a 315 pound stone that we throw on our shoulder, and he literally lifts it flipped on its end and upside down. Like it's so, depending on who you are, your strengths, your levers and everything, it's totally different stone. Or you flip it on its head and lift it that one, you have a whole different challenge. Like it's just a fascinating thing. And I don't mean to take it right back to what we were saying about Scotland and just start stone name dropping or anything, but just the history with some of it. Like we went up to Strathmore of Durness, which is a very remote area, and I apologize if I'm getting this wrong. I really do. But from my understanding, we were in the top 10 people who have lifted in modern times. And there's something really fascinating about that. Like this, for those of you that don't know much about stone lifting or don't know about the Strathmore of Durness, like the location it's in is near northern Scotland. It's in northern Scotland, getting up towards the top, but it's where the Vikings came down and met the Picts. And if you know anything about the Vikings or anything about the Picts, they were as badass as they came. And that stone is just a few kilometers, if I remember correctly, away from a Pictish Broch, which is a Broch was
2,000 plus years old.
Yeah, 2,200-year-old like dwelling, and so that's. I'm not saying that stone has been lifted for that long. We don't know exactly how long. It is very, very old, but the fact that these areas have been inhabited, and if you go look at the Plutarch and Pudric stone, right? That is on the plinth that they're lifted onto. We went there and we spoke to the current landowner, and there was archaeologists there that said that plinth has been in the ground for 5,000 years. There's something just mind-blowing. Before the pyramids of Giza were built, that stone was put in the ground by someone. And now, not saying they were lifting stones to it, that's probably a more recent adaptation. But I don't know, I've traveled a lot of the world to see ancient temples and structures, and it's been a really big part of my life. But now to combine that history with my love of lifting and strength is just... I don't know. It just clicks for a reason.
It's amazing. And it's not to say that there haven't been a lot of these historical stones that have been lost to history, which we know by watching guys like David Keown, who's just traipsing across Ireland and completely shining a light on this forgotten history of stone lifting in Ireland, which is incredible. And he's someone that we very much would like to have on the show to chat, because his story is amazing. For example, the Menzies stone out front of an incredibly beautifully manicured castle. Ardvorlich, pardon my pronunciation, out front of an incredibly beautiful and manicured castle, right? You have the land use, the structures, a lot of things have changed, but these stones have remained constant, and they've been preserved and kept front and center in a lot of these places because the locals understand their importance. And it's so wonderful to be able to go and lift these stones and participate and become part of their history.
And just to touch on that, a friend of mine told me a story about the Ardvorlich when he was there. He actually was there within a couple days of us, and he went up to the castle there and spoke to the landowner and was having a conversation with the gentleman, and just shooting the shit. And he said, how long have you and your family been here? And he looked at him dead in the eye and he said, always.
That's amazing.
And when you're from Canada like we are, like we do not have history here. Like we saw houses that were twice as old as our entire country is. And so to hear stuff like that is a whole layer of fascination for us. And it's just, man, it's too cool. It's just really so cool.
And the thing that's amazing too is just the appreciation and the support that you would get from the locals when you go to lift these stones, right? When we went to lift the Pudric, we went in and just knocked on a door where there happened to be someone out cutting the lawn and said, hey, we're looking for this stone. And they said, oh, it's just down the way. We'll walk over, we'll knock on the door. If they're not there, we'll just let you in the back and you can go lift it. And you go into this picturesque, beautiful farmstead. There's horses. Again, the land use has changed significantly since that Neolithic stone plinth was erected, and the stones are still there and they're still open and available, and the landowners even celebrate and support it. There's a logbook where you can go in and sign, and it was just such an incredible experience, and just further reinforced the fact that this is something I want to do more of. I want to continue to explore and learn more about. I want to talk to other people who do this, which here we are. So I guess now is sort of the part where we talk about what is the plans for this podcast? Where do we want this to go? What do we want to do with this?
Yeah, and Dale, you mentioned earlier about David Keown, and hope I'm pronouncing your name right, David, but he has a lot going on in Ireland right now, and it's incredible to watch. But there are so many guys like him that have been finding stones all over the world. You got Ryan Stewart, you got Sean Urquhart, you got James Graham, just to name a few. And we're hoping, I've talked to a couple of those guys, and we're hoping to get them on. And we want to open it up to the community as well. Like, this is, we're hosting it, let's call it, but this is for all of us, right? This is
we're a conduit.
Well, that's exactly it, man. And so please reach out to us on social media, whether it's through the podcast, Instagram. My handle is Caveman Dave Man. Dale's is I Bite It, and you can just IBYDEIT.
That's right, yeah.
It's you can reach out to us and just throw some names at us, or if there's anyone you want to hear or talk to or talk about, or we're trying to put out to everybody here.
This is definitely going to be an iterative process, right? We are very new to this. We want this to be a platform through which we can speak to the people that we find to be fascinating and influential. But really, what we see in our Instagram newsfeed is just a glimpse of the actual sort of global stone lifting community. So provide us recommendations. Let us know who you want to hear, what sort of content you have enjoyed, what you haven't enjoyed, right? We own this podcast. We want everyone to understand that they're contributors, right? We want to produce something that people want to listen to, because I think just being able to sort of contribute to what has been an absolutely, momentous growth in this stone lifting community is something that's important to us. We want to further nurture community, our stone lifting community locally. But if we can have a small part in sort of increasing the visibility and the celebration of stone lifting on a global scale, then we are very, very happy to do it. So please do provide us feedback, constructive feedback. We know we're both ugly. You don't have to point it out. But for everything else, send us a message. Let us know what you want to see going forward.
Yeah, because we just have so much to learn. We're noobs to this, right? Like Dale hasn't even been doing it. Well, it's just coming up to maybe a year, and I'm
stone lifting or podcasting, because I think we've been doing podcasting for 36 minutes. But
there we go. I was eating the stone lifting. We're new to this. I'm sure there's so many people we don't know of, because as we mentioned before, most of our information comes from Instagram, because that's honestly at this point the best way to meet people, communicate, and get your big lifts and videos and trips and all that out there. It's a great platform. So anything you guys can think of, like Dale said, like we own this podcast, is like the collective we, like all of us, right? So whatever, give us some information, some feedback, and let's do this.
Yeah, no, we're excited. For anyone who is still listening, thank you very much. We're going to try and release these on a fairly set schedule. We both have a lot of, we have personal lives and professional lives we've got to contend with this and work around as well. But, hopefully once per month, we're going to keep pushing these out and give us feedback. We have a lot to learn. We have a lot to share, and we're hoping that as a community, we can make this something that people enjoy. So,
all right.
Peace.
Bye.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please be so kind as to leave the show a review, and then follow us over on Instagram at stonesofstrength_podcast.